In 1993, Porsche sold just 14,362 cars worldwide. For context, they'd been selling over 50,000 just 3 years earlier. The company was hemorrhaging money, production lines sat empty, and workers were being laid off every week. Banks were circling, ready to pull the plug. One of the most legendary names in automotive history was weeks away from total collapse. This is the story of how Porsche nearly died and the controversial decisions that saved it. The late 1980s were golden years for Porsche. The 911 was an icon. The 944 was a sales success. The 928 GT was their flagship grand tour. They were selling cars as fast as they could build them, and profits were rolling in. Everything seemed perfect. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The 911, for all its legendary status, was fundamentally the same car it had been in 1963. The air-cooled flat six couldn't meet increasingly strict emissions regulations. The interior felt dated compared to what Lexus and Acura were offering. And the basic architecture, with that engine hanging behind the rear axle, was becoming a liability in crash tests. The 928 was supposed to be the 911's replacement, Porsche's future, but it never connected with customers. It was expensive, complex, and to many Porsche purists, it just wasn't a real Porsche. The front-engine Grand Tour couldn't capture the magic of the rear-engine sports car. Then the early 90s recession hit, hard. Luxury car sales collapsed overnight. In the United States, Porsche's biggest market, sales went into freefall. In 1991, they sold 4,394 cars in America. 4,000 cars. For comparison, they'd sold over 30,000 just a few years before the numbers globally were catastrophic. 1992, 23,060 cars. 1993, 14,362 cars. That's a 71% drop in just 5 years. The company was losing money on every single vehicle they produced. Manufacturing costs in Germany were astronomical, production was inefficient, and they had multiple aging model lines that nobody wanted. By early 1993, Porsche was on the brink. The company had just 14 days of operating cash left. 14 days. Banks were preparing to foreclose. Merger talks with other manufacturers were underway. Mercedes-Benz was interested in buying the company and gutting it for parts. The Porsche family, descendants of Ferdinand Porsche himself, were fighting among themselves about what to do. 16 different family members sat on the supervisory board, all with different opinions, all arguing while the company burned. Porsche needed a miracle. In September 1992, a 40-year-old engineer named Wendelin Wiedeking was appointed as head of production. Nobody outside Porsche had heard of him. He wasn't from a famous automotive family. He hadn't designed legendary race cars. He was just a production guy who'd spent time studying manufacturing in Japan. Within months, he was promoted to CEO. The choice was controversial. Many at Porsche didn't trust him. He wasn't a car guy in the traditional sense. He was a manufacturing expert, a process optimizer. Some saw him as a bureaucrat, not a visionary. But Wiedeking understood something that others didn't. Porsche's problem wasn't just that they weren't selling enough cars. It was that they couldn't build cars efficiently enough to make money, even if they were selling them. He'd spent time at Toyota, learning their production system, and what he saw there shocked him. Japanese manufacturers were building cars in a fraction of the time it took Porsche, with better quality control, and at much lower cost. Not because they had cheaper labor, but because they had better systems. Porsche was taking over 120 hours to build a single car. Parts sat in warehouses for weeks. Quality control happened at the end of the line, meaning defects were expensive to fix. The entire production philosophy was outdated. So Wiedeking did something that, at the time, seemed unthinkable for a proud German company. He brought in Japanese consultants to teach Porsche how to build cars. The reaction inside the company was explosive. German engineers who'd been building some of the world's finest sports cars for decades were now being lectured by outsiders about how to do their jobs. Workers protested. Some walked out. The sentiment was clear. We're Porsche, we don't need help from anyone. But Wiedeking pushed forward. Production times were slashed, inventory was reduced, quality control was moved to every stage of assembly, not just the end. Workers were given more autonomy and responsibility. Suppliers were brought into the process earlier. The results were undeniable. By 1995, production time per car dropped to 72 hours. Quality improved dramatically. Costs fell, but they still weren't out of the woods. They needed new products. The 911 was outdated. The 928 and 968 were being discontinued. The lineup was dying. But developing new cars from scratch would cost hundreds of millions of dollars Porsche didn't have. Wiedeking made another controversial decision: platform sharing with Volkswagen. This was heresy. Porsche, the independent sports car manufacturer, sharing parts with Volkswagen, a mass-market people's car company? The purists were outraged. But the math was simple. Sharing platforms, engines, and components would cut development costs by 30 to 40%. It was survival, not betrayal. The first result of this strategy was the Boxster. When the Boxster concept was revealed at the 1993 Detroit Auto Show, it caused a sensation. A mid-engine roadster with classic Porsche proportions, priced around $40,000. Finally, an affordable Porsche that didn't feel like a compromise. But behind that beautiful design was cold, calculated pragmatism. The Boxster would share its basic platform and many components with the next-generation 911. This meant development costs were split between two model lines. Parts could be ordered in higher volumes, reducing unit costs. Efficiencies multiplied across the lineup. When the production Boxster launched in 1996, it was an immediate hit. It drove beautifully, looked stunning, and most importantly, it made money. For the first time in years, Porsche had a vehicle that was both desirable and profitable. The company was finally breaking even. But the real test was still ahead. The next generation 911. The 996, launched in 1998, was the most radical departure in 911 history. For the first time ever, it had a water-cooled engine. The air-cooled flat six, the heart and soul of every 911 for 35 years, was gone. Purists called it sacrilege. Some said it wasn't a real 911 anymore. And then there were the headlights. To save money, the 996 shared its headlight design with the cheaper Boxster. They became known as fried egg headlights, and they're still mocked today. For a flagship sports car costing $70,000, sharing parts with a $40,000 roadster felt cheap. The criticism was intense. Porsche forums exploded with anger. Magazine reviews questioned whether Porsche had lost its soul. The company that had built the ultimate driver's car was now building something that looked like a parts bin special. But here's the thing, it worked. The 996 was faster than the old 993. It was more reliable. It was more comfortable. It met emission standards. It could be sold worldwide without restrictions. And critically, it was profitable to build. Sales took off. The combination of the Boxster and the 996 brought Porsche back from the dead. By 1998, the company was making serious money again. By 2000, they were more profitable per vehicle than almost any other automaker in the world. The decisions that purists hated, the compromises that seemed like betrayals, had saved the company. By the mid-2000s, Porsche had become one of the most profitable car companies on earth. They'd survived what should have been a death sentence. The company that was weeks from bankruptcy in 1993 was now so financially strong that in 2005, they attempted to buy Volkswagen, the company that had helped save them. That acquisition attempt ultimately backfired, leading to VW eventually taking control of Porsche. But that's a different story for a different time. The lesson here isn't just about business survival. It's about what happens when tradition meets reality. Porsche built its reputation on engineering purity and racing heritage. The air-cooled 911 was sacred. Independence was non-negotiable. But when the company was dying, those principles became luxuries they couldn't afford. Wendelin Wiedeking understood that survival required sacrifice. He made the unpopular choices. He brought in outside help. He shared platforms. He killed the air-cooled engine. And he was hated for it by many enthusiasts at the time. But he saved Porsche. Today, the water-cooled 911S that were once controversial are now beloved classics. The Boxster is recognized as one of the best sports cars ever made. And Porsche continues to thrive, still building some of the world's finest driving machines. Sometimes the most important decision isn't the popular one. Sometimes survival means letting go of the past. Even when that past is legendary, Porsche learned that the hard way, and they're still here because of it.